You know what's funny about being the only human in a multi-species research station? Everyone treats you like you're made of wet paper. I mean, literally. The Kazakh actually tried to carry me to the medical bay when I stubbed my toe last week. My toe? Like I was going to shatter into a million pieces from a minor bruise. I'm Dr. Min Zhang, and I've spent the last 3 years as the resident xenobiologist at Research Station Alpha 7 on Kepler 742b. It's a pretty sweet gig, if you ignore the constant patronizing looks from my alien colleagues. They're all here to study various species, including humans, whom they've collectively decided are the most puzzling evolutionary accident in the galaxy. Dr. Zhang, please allow me to assist you with that equipment case, rumbled Zarvex, his forearms already reaching for the relatively lightweight container I was carrying. Your endoskeleton might experience microfractures from such strenuous activity. I clutched my cargo closer, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. Thanks, but I've managed to carry my own equipment for the past 35 years without breaking in half. The massive drachnid behind him clicked his mandibles in what passed for their version of nervous laughter. It's remarkable how you've survived this long with such fragile calcium-based support structures. Simply remarkable. The worst part, they weren't even trying to be condescending. They genuinely believed humans were some kind of miracle of survival against all odds. I mean, sure, we don't have reinforced exoskeletons like the drachnids, or the muscular density of the Kazakh, or even the regenerative capabilities of the Murex. But come on. We made it to the stars, didn't we? The daily briefing wasn't any better. Chief Researcher Zixta, a towering Murex with iridescent scales, was presenting the latest findings on local wildlife adaptation. When she got to the section about defensive capabilities, she actually used air quotes while saying human physical attributes. And here we see the fascinating case of human survival, despite their complete lack of natural defenses, she continued, bringing up a holographic comparison chart. No claws, no armor, minimal muscle density, and highly limited sensory input. Yet somehow... She trailed off, mandibles twitching in what I recognized as their equivalent of head-shaking wonderment. I sat there, sipping my coffee. Another thing they found horrifically dangerous. You willingly ingest nerve toxins. And wondered for the 1000th time if I should mention that we didn't get to space by being helpless. But what would be the point? They just attribute it to luck or remarkable technological compensation for physical inadequacies. Little did they know they were about to get a front-row seat to exactly what this weakest species could do. Because something was hunting near the station, something that had even the mighty Kazakh worried. And while they were all flexing their impressive natural weapons and debating hunting strategies, I was quietly doing what humans do best: observing, analyzing, and planning. Let them underestimate us. It wouldn't be the first time being weak worked in our favor. The first attack came during third shift. We lost 3 perimeter sensors and a geological sampling unit to what the security feeds showed as nothing more than a blur of motion. The next morning I found myself standing with the station's security team, staring at claw marks that went 6 inches deep into reinforced durasteel. Magnificent, breathed Dr. Katal, his secondary eyes dilating with excitement, while his primary set remained fixed on the damage. The pressure required to achieve this level of structural deformation would exceed 50,000 psi. Simply magnificent. I kept my mouth shut and took measurements, but internally I was running calculations. The spacing of the marks, the angle of penetration, the residual biological material left in the grooves, everything told a story, if you knew how to read it. The locals called it a shadow stalker. Real original, I know. But after our 4th attack in 2 weeks, I had to admit the name fit. The thing moved faster than our best tracking systems could follow, hit harder than our strongest barriers could withstand, and seemed to have a particular fondness for expensive research equipment. The beast took down a full-grown Hrath beast last night, announced Zarvex during the emergency security meeting. The holographic display showed the aftermath. A creature the size of an earth elephant, with natural armor plating that could stop most energy weapons, torn apart like wet cardboard. 3 kilometers from the station perimeter. The room erupted in concerned chittering and rumbling. A Hrath beast was supposed to be near the top of the local food chain. Emphasis on supposed to be. "I've analysed its hunting pattern," growled Clerks Major Ver, our head of security. His massive frame towered over the tactical display as he jabbed at various attack sites with a clawed finger. "The creature is testing our defences, learning our patterns. It's intelligent." "Then we hunt it first," declared one of the Drachnid researchers, mandibles clicking with aggressive enthusiasm. "A coordinated strike team. We have the finest warriors from 6 worlds here." I raised my hand, fighting to keep my face neutral as every alien eye in the room swiveled to stare at me. "I'd like to join the hunt." The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds before the room exploded in what I can only describe as alien laughter. Even the usually diplomatic Zixta couldn't quite keep her scales from flickering in amusement. "Dr. Jiang," she began, clearly trying to be gentle, "while we appreciate your enthusiasm, this is hardly a suitable task for your species' capabilities. The Shadow Stalker has already demonstrated strength sufficient to—" "Tear through Durasteel, yes," I interrupted, pulling up my own data analysis on the main display. "It's also showing clear signs of territorial behavior, preferred hunting times, and environmental preferences, all of which I've been documenting." "Fascinating academic work," rumbled Katal patronizingly. "But this requires warriors, not observers. The beast's last attack breached our secondary perimeter. When we find it, the engagement will be intense." Looking at my colleagues, I saw what humanity must have looked like to every predator that ever underestimated us on Earth. They were all focused on teeth, claws, armor, and strength. None of them were asking why a creature that could tear through our defenses like paper was being so methodical about it. "I'll continue my research then," I said mildly, gathering my datapad. "Don't let me keep you from your hunt." The next day, I watched from my lab window as the finest warriors from 6 worlds marched out with enough firepower to level a small city. They had combat stims, plasma weapons, powered armor. Everything apex predators needed to feel confident about hunting other apex predators. They came back 12 hours later with 3 wounded warriors, 2 destroyed suits of powered armor, and exactly 0 shadow stalkers. The creature had led them on a merry chase through the wilderness, separated their forces, and then systematically picked apart their foolproof strategy. "It anticipated every move," Ver admitted during the debriefing, his proud posture slightly wilted, "as if it knew exactly how we would react." Of course it did. That's what happens when you think like a predator. You become predictable to other predators. But nobody asked the weak little human who'd spent the whole time analyzing feed data, soil samples, and atmospheric conditions. Nobody noticed me quietly requisitioning some research equipment from Earth. Let them plan their next hunt. Let them bring bigger guns and stronger armor. I had something better. Data, analysis, and a plan that no apex predator would ever see coming. Because here's the thing about being the weakest species. You learn really quickly that strength isn't everything. And I was about to give everyone a practical demonstration of that lesson. You know what's really hilarious about being underestimated? The freedom it gives you to work in plain sight. While the station's mighty warriors were nursing their wounds and planning increasingly elaborate hunting strategies, I was piecing together something far more interesting. Patterns. The Shadow Stalker wasn't just hunting, it was playing a game. "Look at this," I muttered to myself, spreading out thermal mapping data across my holographic workspace. 3 weeks of attacks had given me a beautiful data set. Temperature variations, atmospheric pressure changes, electromagnetic disturbances, everything our sensors had caught before being destroyed. The creature wasn't just fast, it was manipulating local environmental conditions. Every attack created a precise pressure differential, like a miniature weather system. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just an apex predator, it was a living physics equation. "Dr. Jiang," Jixta's voice made me jump as she slithered into my lab. "The Council is curious about your recent equipment requisitions. These items seem unusual. I glanced at the pile of seemingly random Earth tech cluttering my workspace. Just testing a theory, I said, carefully adjusting what appeared to be a broken weather drone. Nothing that would interest the hunting parties. Her scales flickered with that now familiar mixture of pity and concern. We appreciate your academic interest, but perhaps your time would be better spent on less dangerous pursuits. The next hunt will require our most physically capable. Of course, I interrupted smoothly. I'm just documenting environmental impacts, for the record. I deliberately fumbled with a canister, making her wince. Purely observational. After she left, I went back to my calculations. The Shadow Stalker was using pressure differentials to move at incredible speeds, like a living torpedo. Perfect predatory adaptation, except for one tiny flaw. The kind of flaw you'd only notice if you came from a planet where being perfectly adapted could get you killed. I spent the next 2 days setting up my research equipment in what looked like the most haphazard way possible. Solar-powered atmospheric sensors that seemed to be placed randomly. Damaged weather drones that appeared to be barely functioning. Each piece was positioned with precise carelessness, drawing exasperated looks from my colleagues. The human appears to be engaged in some form of stress response, I overheard Katal telling Vera. Perhaps we should increase the psychological support protocols. Vera's mandibles clicked in agreement. Such a shame, but understandable given their limited capacity for handling crisis situations. I bit back a grin as I deliberately dropped a sensor array, making them both flinch. The biggest advantage of being seen as fragile. Nobody expects you to be dangerous. The real work happened during third shift, when most of the station was in sleep cycle. That's when I fine-tuned my network of devices, each one precisely calibrated to create something that hadn't existed on this planet before, a trap based on pure physics. Your equipment is malfunctioning, Zarvex informed me the next morning, 4 arms gesturing at the readings. These atmospheric manipulators are creating irregular patterns. Oh dear, I said, trying to sound distressed. Perhaps I should check them, though I'd hate to go out there with that dangerous creature around. Allow me to send a security team, he offered immediately. Your safety must be prioritized, given your limitations. I waved him off with just the right amount of nervous gratitude. No, they're needed for the real hunting work. I'll just monitor from here. As I watched him leave, I made a few final adjustments to my system. The Shadow Stalker had evolved to be the perfect hunter on this world, using natural phenomena to its advantage. But it had never encountered something that could turn those same phenomena against it. The next hunting party was scheduled to depart in 12 hours. They had plasma rifles, motion trackers, and enough armor to withstand a small war. I had a collection of weather devices that looked like they'd been arranged by a scared scientist who'd lost their mind. Perfect. Because here's the thing about being the weakest species in a galaxy of apex predators. You learn that the best traps don't look like traps at all. They look like mistakes, like vulnerability, like exactly what a mighty hunter would expect from prey. I sent one final calibration signal to my network and settled in to wait. Let them think I was hiding in my lab, playing with broken equipment. The stage was set for a physics lesson that none of them would ever forget. After all, the thing about apex predators, they never look up to see who might be hunting them. The hunting party was gearing up when the perimeter alarms went off again. Right on schedule. Multiple breaches in Sector 7, Ferrer's voice boomed through the command center. All combat personnel, battle stations. I watched the tactical display as dots of different colors, representing the station's finest warriors, converged on the breach points. They moved with practiced precision, their formations perfect, their strategies honed by generations of combat experience. They were also moving exactly as predicted. Dr. Zhang, Zixta called out, please remain in the secure area. We wouldn't want... Actually, I interrupted, tapping at my datapad. I need to check on my equipment. Some strange readings coming from Sector 4. The look of horror that crossed her features would have been comical if I hadn't been so focused. Absolutely not. The Shadow Stalker is nowhere near Sector 4. I said confidently, already heading for the door. "Trust me." I heard her calling for a security detail to protect the vulnerable human, but I was already gone. Sometimes being underestimated means people forget you can run. The night air of Kepler 742b was thick with moisture as I made my way to my observation post. Above me, my network of malfunctioning weather devices hummed quietly, creating invisible patterns in the atmosphere. The hunting party's chatter filled my earpiece. "Movement in quadrant 6. Negative contact switching to thermal. By the void, it's fast!" I settled into position and activated my final sequence. Around the station, subtle changes began taking place. Air pressure shifted, temperature gradients altered by fractions of degrees. Nothing obvious enough to trigger warnings, just enough to change the playing field. The Shadow Stalker appeared exactly where my calculations said it would. A living blur of motion, heading straight for what looked like an easy target. My conspicuously exposed position. "Dr. Zhang!" multiple voices screamed in my earpiece. "Get out of there!" But I stayed put, watching my readings. The creature was moving at near supersonic speed, using its evolved ability to manipulate pressure differentials, just like every other time it had attacked. Except this time, it wasn't the only thing manipulating the environment. 3 seconds before impact, my network activated. Precisely calibrated atmospheric channels suddenly shifted. The carefully maintained pressure gradients that the creature used for its high-speed movement inverted. Physics doesn't care how strong you are. The Shadow Stalker hit an invisible wall of condensed air at just under the speed of sound. The impact was spectacular. A creature that could tear through reinforced steel found itself completely stopped by nothing more than properly arranged molecules. But that wasn't the real trap. The sudden stop created exactly the kind of pressure differential the creature used for hunting. Except this one wasn't under its control. The backlash caught it in what was effectively a meteorological pinball machine, bouncing it between precisely positioned pressure points. By the time it hit the ground, the mighty apex predator had been thoroughly introduced to one of humanity's greatest weapons, applied science. The silence that followed was deafening. Where moments before there had been chaos and motion, now there was just a very still, very solid view of what had been terrorizing the station. In the flesh, it was both beautiful and terrifying, all sleek lines and natural armor perfectly evolved for speed and power, and completely unconscious. "Containment team to my location," I said calmly into my comm. "Bring a Class 4 stasis field, and maybe a camera." The response was delayed, probably because everyone was trying to process what they'd just witnessed. I used the time to take readings, carefully documenting exactly what had happened. They arrived in force, every warrior species represented, weapons ready, expressions ranging from disbelief to outright shock. Catal reached the creature first, his scientific curiosity overcoming his caution. "It's impossible," he muttered, scanning the unconscious predator. "The kinetic energy involved, the pressure differentials. How did you—" "I watched," I said simply. "While everyone else was focusing on how to overpower it, I was learning how it moved. Then I just turned its strengths into weaknesses." His massive frame, seemingly smaller somehow, stepped forward. But the equipment, it was malfunctioning. It was working exactly as designed. I pulled up the schematics on my pad. Each piece created a small atmospheric disturbance, harmless alone but together. They turned the atmosphere itself into a weapon. The same principles the creature used to move so fast became a trap it couldn't detect until it was too late. "But you—" Zixita struggled for words, her scales shifting through colors I'd never seen before. "You stood there, as bait." I shrugged. Calculated risk. I knew exactly where it would hit the first pressure barrier. I was never in danger. The containment team was efficiently securing the Shadow Stalker, but everyone's attention was still on me, the supposedly weak human, who had done what their combined military might couldn't. "Besides," I added, unable to resist a small grin, "someone once told me that humans are remarkably good at surviving despite our limitations." Above us, my network of devices continued their quiet work, maintaining the atmospheric barriers just in case our friend woke up early. They weren't impressive to look at, just basic weather monitoring equipment, repurposed with a little human ingenuity. But then again, humans have never looked particularly impressive. That's kind of our thing. The following week was interesting, to say the least. Funny how quickly attitudes can change when you take down something that could bench press a tank. The applications are remarkable, Katal was saying, gesturing enthusiastically at my data displays. Using environmental manipulation as a defensive mechanism, it's brilliant. Though, of course, implementing it would require significant computational resources to compensate for species lacking human observational capabilities. I didn't bother pointing out that he just accidentally insulted his own species while complimenting humans. Progress comes in small steps. The Shadow Stalker, now safely contained in a high-security research facility, had become the station's premier research subject. Every species had their own take on what my success meant. A warrior's true strength lies in understanding the enemy, Ver announced during one briefing, as if this had been his philosophy all along. The human demonstrated this principle perfectly. Indeed, rumbled Zarvex, all four arms gesturing in agreement. Though we must consider the evolutionary implications. Perhaps physical fragility necessitates superior analytical capabilities. I sat through these discussions with what I hoped was an appropriately modest expression, sipping my still controversial coffee. The truth was both simpler and more complex than they imagined. You knew, Zixta said quietly, catching me alone in my lab one evening. From the beginning you knew how to trap it. Why didn't you say anything? Would you have listened? I asked, genuinely curious. Or would you have tried to modify the plan to include more traditional hunting methods? Her scales shifted in what I'd learned was embarrassment. We would have tried to protect you. Exactly. I pulled up the complete data set from the hunt. Sometimes the best advantage is being underestimated. The Shadow Stalker never saw me as a threat, just like none of you did. That's why it fell for the trap. The implications of this statement took a moment to sink in. When they did, her primary eyes widened. You used our assumptions about your weakness. As part of the trap, yes, I smiled. Humanity didn't survive Earth by being the strongest species. We survived by being the most adaptable, and by being really, really good at turning others' strengths against them. The changes in the station were subtle but significant. My equipment requisitions no longer came with concerned inquiries about my ability to handle them. The constant offers of assistance for basic tasks faded away, and most notably the term weak species disappeared from official reports. But the real change came during the next xenobiology conference, when Katal presented his paper on adaptive survival strategies. His opening statement has since become somewhat famous in xenobiological circles. The true measure of a species' survival capability cannot be measured in physical terms alone. The ability to observe, analyze, and adapt may be the most formidable evolutionary advantage of all. I kept my own report much simpler. A complete technical breakdown of the atmospheric trap, a detailed analysis of the Shadow Stalker's hunting methods, and one small note that still makes me smile. Sometimes the most dangerous creature in any environment is the one that looks the least threatening. Just ask any mouse with a trap. They still don't get the joke, but they're learning. These days, new human researchers at the station get a very different welcome briefing. Sure, there's still the occasional worried glance when we lift something heavy, but it comes with a newfound undercurrent of respect. The kind of respect you give something that you know could outsmart you if it wanted to. The Shadow Stalker incident, as it's now officially known, became a mandatory case study at the Galactic Science Academy, not under successful hunt strategies or apex predator management like you might expect. No, you'll find it under evolution of intelligence and adaptive problem solving. Last week, a new Drachnid researcher asked me how humans managed to survive long enough to develop intelligence, given our obvious physical shortcomings. I showed him Earth's fossil record, specifically the part about all the apex predators that aren't around anymore. But surely that was luck, he insisted. mandibles twitching uncertainly. "Sure," I agreed, watching him try to decide if I was being sarcastic. Just like it was luck that led to a weak species making it to the stars, and pure coincidence that we're now helping design defense systems for most major space stations. He's still trying to figure out if I was joking. The funny thing about being underestimated is that it never really gets old. There's always someone new who looks at our soft skin and fragile bones and makes assumptions. Someone who sees our lack of natural weapons as a disadvantage rather than the reason we got so good at making our own. Yesterday, I had to carry my own equipment case again. Not because Zarvex wasn't around to help. He was. He just wasn't worried about my endoskeleton anymore. Progress, I suppose. Though I do sometimes miss the days when everyone tried to carry things for me. Getting your own coffee just isn't the same when people no longer think the cup might shatter your fingers. But hey, that's the price of respect in a galaxy full of apex predators. Sometimes you have to give up being babied in exchange for being seen as what you really are. The result of a planet that taught its children that being clever is better than being strong. Just don't tell them about the coffee. I'm still enjoying their faces when I drink my nerve toxins every morning. Some traditions are worth keeping after all.